Here we are, a special edition of TalkBox, a sad version. We will try to be joyous and contemplate the legacy of the greatest of all time. Muhammad Ali is gone, but never to be forgotten. We are here to discuss the man, the myth, the legend, and we are going to touch base with people who were with him, right by his side. Very special guest coming up. Yes, the time came that we all expected. Folks, we knew it was coming. The hints were there for a long time. The deterioration was apparent. His vessel was breaking down, but the soul, we knew it would be living on, and it is so. So we will ponder the life and times of the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali. An era ended Friday into Saturday when Ali's gigantic heart stopped beating. You could argue that the era ended decades ago when he left the sport, but the finality of it hit home, and it hit your heart when Ali's final fight ended. This now is the AA era to us who eat and sleep and live and breathe this sport, which to us is not a mere sport, but in fact a metaphor for our existence, which acts as a blueprint for living. Not the BC or the AD period. It is now the after Ali time period. It is, for some of us, I think, a sadder space because the minute hope of a comeback is done. The sport seems smaller because even in this diminished era, and this is one, you could always point to Ali, to that monumental piece of living history, and say no other sport can boast that creature, that masterpiece from the Creator. No more. We are left alone, more so, slightly adrift, because he was the foundation of boxing. He represented all the elements which made it, at its best, the sport to which all others aspire to. No sport tests you more, and if you pass the test, no one could dispute the magnitude of the task that you mastered. The rumble in the jungle, the thriller in Manila, etc., etc. He proved and reproved time and again he was what he said he was, the greatest. I confess, folks, I didn't shed a tear when I heard the news because I had steeled myself to this eventuality a long time ago. As Parkinson's robbed him of movement and then of speech, you always wondered when he'd succumb, when the big ref in the sky would step in. And when his number was called, he was introduced and then reintroduced and reconsidered and analyzed with an intensity befitting his stature. This was the response given to beloved heads of state. And of course, he had detractors who couldn't and wouldn't let go of a past imperfect. To some, he was a draft dodger, a racist, a bully. And we'll discuss some of these designations today on TalkBox, acknowledging that the man born Cassius Clay was no saint, no angel, but a man who sinned and left behind not only a legacy of love and mercy and joy and accomplishment, but his resume of living was complicated. We will delve into it all with very special guests like George Foreman, Jerry Eisenberg, and Gene Kilroy, people who were there, who shared time and space with him, and are best able to assess the life and times of the bold and the beautiful and bad and funny and flawed and ferocious Cassius Marcellus Clay, a.k.a. Muhammad Ali, a.k.a. the greatest of all time.
This is the hardest hitter since Marciano. This man is greater than Joe Louis. I've been reading what you're saying. They say he's fat. Look at me now. Don't tell me that ain't a perfect specimen of a man.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by the esteemed sports writer, the writing pride of New Jersey, Jerry Eisenberg, who is entering the International Boxing Hall of Fame this weekend. And we do appreciate him taking the time to tell us about the greatest who is gone. Jerry was there, and we're trying to talk to people who were there, who saw him in action, and we don't want secondhand news, secondhand knowledge. Jerry was there for the big fights. Jerry Eisenberg, thank you so much for joining us.
That's my pleasure. You know, I was there for 50 years with him. He was one of my close friends, one of my closest friends at different times. And we knew it was coming. The world knew it was coming. And in a sense, it was like his last gift to us. So the shock was not what it would have been, you know, had he died suddenly.
Right. Jerry, do you remember the first time you laid eyes on Cassius Clay, then Muhammad Ali?
Sure. 1960, Rome Olympics. He had won the light heavyweight gold medal, which meant nothing to me, really. I mean, he was just another guy, really, but he was a gold medal winner. And he was sitting on the steps, and he had the medal around his neck, and all the athletes in all the different sports, you know, walk by each other in the village, and they're passing by, and he's hollering, "I'm the best. You'll see. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the champion." And half of them didn't even speak English, didn't know what he was saying. But I did notice one thing. The female athletes always stopped and looked back over their shoulder, which said, well, it meant to me, maybe this is a guy to watch.
And indeed, we did watch. Did you know immediately the greatness inside the ring? Was that apparent, or was it more the charisma factor? Okay.
I mean, anybody who tells you they did, what can I say? His first professional fight, which I didn't see, but I saw the film of years later because I knew the promoter. It was another King, Bill King, this guy's name was local. He was a local promoter in Louisville. First fight, he fought a guy named Toonie Hunsaker, who was a sheriff in the hills of West Virginia, and they found the right guy. I mean, they were worried. In fact, Bill King said, look, it was hard to find an opponent. We needed to find, number one, a guy I could beat, and we needed to have some appeal in the fight, and here was a white guy sheriff, and he was not that good a fighter, so it seemed like it was the right thing to do. The fight was not exciting, very one-sided, and that was his debut. But we didn't have a friendship at that point. I had met him, and that's all, really. And then Angie Dundee began having him call me before his fights. And he calls me and he said, I'm fighting Charlie Powell tonight. I'm fighting tomorrow night. You got to come out. You got to come out. I'm saying, I'm not going to pit. I don't like to stop for Pittsburgh in the winter for gas. I'm not coming out to see you fight a former football player. And he knocked him out like he said he would. But he just went on and until he met Doug Jones, and that was the real test. I thought he lost that fight.
Right.
But and the reason, I had some doubts because Jones was just really an overstuffed. He was a good fighter. He was an overstuffed light heavyweight. But when Ali got off the canvas and knocked out Henry Cooper, who, for all the bleeding and everything else, was a hell of a fighter and a hell of a puncher, and Ali took a hell of a punch. I began to think, well, he should fight Liston. I never thought he could beat Liston.
Right.
And I think anybody who thought he could is telling a lie, who said they thought he could is telling a lie. And so we went to Miami to see the miracle, and it indeed was.
He had a habit of beating these behemoths, these big, glowering, nasty, Herculean types. So his ring exploits were immense and incredible, a joy to watch. Jerry, what I'm gratified about is that so many people are now learning about the outside the ring material, the humanitarian, the activist, all those elements. What discussions did you have during the hiatus from the sport as he was being that conscientious objector to the Vietnam War? Were you speaking to Ali then, and
yes.
Was he always as confident in private when talking to you, or did he let the guard down, Jerry?
It didn't work that way with us. It really didn't. We had conversations. If they were worth writing, I wrote them. I was interested in him as a person. Remember, I'm 11 years older than he was when he died.
Right.
So, and at that, when you go back to the younger years, I mean, he was really a baby. Intellectually, at that point, there was nothing for us to discuss early. The war, I think, really brought us together because I didn't like, first of all, the way he was handled. The government, and I had seen all those major fights, and this is before the exile.
Right.
And you know, now he lost a tough fight to Joe Frazier, and anybody who was out 3 years would have lost that fight in much larger fashion than he did. And he was, but then I remember the morning after he fought Zora Foley, which is the last fight he had before the exile.
Right.
And I you know, when he would speak, you could remember his words. I remember he said he cut himself shaving, and everybody asked him, you know, were you hurt in the fight? He said, you know, and of course he wasn't hurt. But he said, you know, fellas, he said, I don't want to talk about anything as far as fights because I'm going to my biggest fight next, and this is what I believe in. And he went explained that he was a member of the Nation of Islam, which, by the way, a lot of people never knew. Of course, he left the Nation of Islam, and he became a devout Sunni Muslim.
Right.
But he really laid it out there that there was going to be a fight, and if he lost, he'd go to jail. And I didn't take that too seriously, although a piece of me did. If you remember when he fought George Foreman, they were kicked out of Chicago, and he went to Toronto.
66.
And I remember going up to Toronto and to see him fight Chuvalo, and you know, it wasn't going to be much of a fight. George was a decent middle echelon fighter, but he wasn't in Ellie's class. And I went up there, and I went to a place called Sully's AC Gym. And if I ever direct a fight film, it's going to be directed in Sully's AC Gym, because this looks like a fight gym should look.
Right.
The stairs were creaking. I went up. The windows are so dirty you could barely see the street. This was a fight gym.
A good smell, too? Good odor there, Jerry?
Huh?
A good odor in the gym, too? A good fight gym has to have a good odor, man.
You can hang your socks on it. In fact, I think that's what it was. So there's a kid in the front room, and he's bagging a heavy bag, and I don't see anybody. I said, where's everybody? And he points to the back. I go in the back, and Ali is laying face down on a rubbing table. Now, he's my friend for 50 years, and it's the only fight we ever had in that time, and it wasn't a fight. He was the one that was yelling, not me. And he said to me, what are you doing here? And I said, well, somebody said there's a fight. He said, you know, it's not much of a fight. And I said, well, I'll tell you the truth. Muhammad, I came here because the Canadian government is giving political asylum to those opposed to the Vietnam War. And I want to know if you're going to go home. He jumped off that table, and he got in my face. And I remember him word for word. And he said, that's my birthplace. That's my birth home. You think that someone's going to chase me out? I will not. I'm going back. I'll be in my birth home. And if they want to put me in jail, you know, I don't make the laws. If they want to put me in jail, I'll go to jail. But I'm going home. And in that moment, from the anger in his face and the tone of his voice, I was convinced if he had to go to jail, he would go.
Right. Jerry, when they say he is the greatest of all time and there will never be another like him, are we guilty of hyperbole, perhaps overstating and affixing the man with the halo?
It depends what you're talking about.
Okay.
Mike. It depends what you're talking about. Is he the greatest fighter of all time? No, he's not the greatest fighter of all time. First of all, I'm 85, and the greatest fighter I ever saw on the body of his work would be Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Robinson. The greatest heavyweight I ever saw, I believe, is Joe Louis. But was he the fighter who made the greatest, or the athlete even, who made the greatest impact on America and on the rest of the world? You bet he was.
Right.
Because he stood for something.
Right.
And what he stood for was real.
Right.
And I don't think they didn't understand back then, and maybe they're starting to understand now. Do you know how you make a conscientious objector? I mean, how you decide? It's twofold. The draft board gets a government appointed examiner, and they go in a room, the two of them, and they talk until the guy's made up his mind, and they come out and he says yes, he is, or no, he's not. At the same time, there's an FBI report. Well, to my knowledge, there's no case other than this where the draft board overruled the examiner who said that Ali was a conscientious objector and went with the FBI report, which was very vague and which was the reason the Supreme Court was able to call it a trial error years and years later. The thing about it was they picked a judge who was a retired Republican judge, a little bit to the right of center. His name was Grauman. And he said, yeah, he is. There's no question in my mind. And I was on the Dick Cavett show about a year after that hearing, and I told the story that I thought Grauman was very courageous, and I thought he had done the right thing. And the producer runs, and he stands behind the camera, and he's drawing his hand across his throat, cut, cut, cut. So Cavett says, we're going to go to commercial. We'll be right back. The guy comes out, and he says, the guy's kid is on the phone. He wants to talk to Jerry. Well, that's an anchorman's or a host's night. It makes his whole evening. It's a dream.
Right.
So they hooked him into the show. And he said, Mr. Eisenberg is exactly right. He was ruined among people, not ruined, but he was ignored by the people in his social set after he did that because everybody wanted so badly for Ali to be drafted.
Right.
And he was a courageous guy. He's an unsung hero in the case.
Right.
And Ali was very direct about it. And so I said to myself, well, it's time for me really to get involved in this aspect. And I wrote a column which I based it on a thing called the Constitution. It was called Liberty and Justice for All. And it was his right not to go, and it was the government's right to put him in jail if they felt he was lying about being a conscientious objector. But I believed he was, and so that's the side I took. All hell broke loose. We got thousands of letters. I was in all of the Newhouse papers then, and it was impossible to answer them or open them or anything else. And then we got feces in the mail. We got ticking alarm clocks that were supposed to be bombs. And then one day my son ran into the little office I had in my house and said, Dad, hurry up. Someone is breaking out your windshield. And two guys with sledgehammers were hitting my windshield. And that, of course, came as a result of the thing. But I didn't do anything I wouldn't have done. I remember writing. I didn't particularly care for my brother-in-law, and I remember writing, if this were my brother-in-law, who I don't particularly like, I would defend him on the same basis. Ali's my friend, but that's not why I'm defending him. There's a thing called the Constitution. It's
Did
his
the brother-in-law
right to
read
make
it?
a choice.
Did he read it, Jerry? Or hopefully he missed that paper that day?
Well, he didn't read the papers, but I'll tell you who told him about it, Dick Gregory.
Oh, thanks, Dick.
And so Gregory was in camp years later,
Right.
and he said, did you ever thank Jerry? And he shouldn't have thanked me. Look, I'm doing what's right, and if I'm not doing what I believe, I shouldn't be working in this business.
Right.
Many of us don't, and many of us shouldn't be in this business.
Right.
But in any event, he was getting ready to fight Norton in Yankee Stadium. He was training in Arizona at a place called Sholo, and Gregory was there, and Gregory asked him that, and I came in a room a little bit later, and he said, hey, thanks. I said, for what? I said, why are you thanking me? I haven't done anything. I just got off the plane. He said, thanks for what you did for me when the war, we had all that problem. And I said, you didn't read that. He said, no, I didn't, but Gregory told me what was in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he knew. He knew. He was told enough times. And there are other people. I don't want him. This isn't about me. This is about him.
Right.
And this is about the way he handled it.
Right.
And I really want to talk about what I know about him as a human being.
Please.
This is a guy who was unbelievable with young children and with old people.
Right.
particularly when he he had a persona when the camera was here, but when he was alone with them, it was all give and take. I mean, he loved people. He didn't come back because he kept losing fortunes or whatever. He came back because people were his opium.
Right.
He had to be where the people were, and it's interesting. There were two alleys. The first one was the public one. He'd walk down the street, and all this clever stuff. He just said it over and over again. It was a stick almost.
Right.
A guy would come up to him and say, "Oh, I saw you fight in Zaire. I saw it in the closed circuit at the Strand Theater, and you were great." And he'd say, "Well, you know what? You're not as dumb as you look." And then the guy would go back and he'd have something to tell the guys around the water cooler. I spoke to Allie on the street, and this is what he said. And the guy working on the construction site's got the lunch bucket between his knees, and he's talking to his buddy. He said, "Yeah, he told me that I wasn't as dumb as I look." But and it was standard, and there was so many, it was thousands and thousands of people. But when we were together, Gene Kilroy, who was the camp manager, myself, the other people who were in it, Pat Patterson, the bodyguard, he was hilarious, and it was none of it rehearsed. And you have to argue, and all the arguments were funny. He was a guy you wanted to be around. He's also a guy. Personally, I'll tell you, I was a single parent because I divorced,
right,
and I got the kids, and they had just come to live with me, and they were very nervous because their mother had told them a lot of things about me, and some of them might have been true, I don't know, and we're in Deer Lake, and I'm doing a show for the BBC, that's where it wound up anyway, and I'm driving up there with my 7-year-old daughter and my 11-year-old son, and she says, "Daddy," she said, "I hope that George Foreman knocks his block off." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You don't understand. Both of these men are my friends, and this is a business. So you get up to camp, you keep your mouth shut. You go into the kitchen, you speak to Aunt Coretta. She knows you're coming, and she'll give you something to eat or whatever. And that's, I don't want to hear any more about this." And she said, "Well, you told me not to brag," and he brags all the time. I said, "You're 8 years old. What the hell you got to brag about?" Well, we get up there, and the show goes great. And Robert, my son, is with the crew, and he's carrying stuff for them or whatever. So now it's over, and we're in a dressing room. And Robert's helping them pack up, and she's standing in the back with her, just pressed against the wall in the back of their room, big room. And he says to me, he had never seen my children. He said, "Is that your son?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Didn't he come to live with you?" I said, "Yeah, they just did now." I said, "I think he's a little nervous. He doesn't know what I'm really like, I think." And he said, "Just a minute." He walks over and he puts his arm around Robert. He says, "Robert, he said, can I call you Bob?" Robert, yeah. He said, "Bob, I want to tell you something. You have begun to live with a great man. And if you listen to him, you'll be a great man too." Well, it was a hell of a gesture, He walks away and he sees that's a little girl in the back of the room. Well, if you were 7 or 8 years old and you had just said you hope the guy got knocked out, and you saw your dad whispering to the guy, what would you think your dad was doing? He was ratting around, right? Right. So she's convinced, she's trying to put her molecules into the wall so nobody sees her. And he said, "Little girl, come up here." And she looks at him. He says, "Little girl, come up here now." And he points to the ground in front of him. She comes up very slowly, and on the way, she's so scared she has lost the power of the English language. She can't speak. He swoops in, 6'3". She's about 4'9", 4'10". Picks her up, and she's over his head. And he says, "That's your daddy?" She says, "Don't you lie to me, little girl. Is that your daddy?" "That's not your daddy. Look at that man. That man is ugly. He can't be your daddy. You're beautiful. The gypsies must have brung you. Give me a kiss." So now we're riding back in the car, and she says, "Oh, I hope Muhammad wins." And I said, "You're like all the others. The only difference is the age." But I was touched by what he did.
Right. He was a true friend. Yes, true friend, Jerry. Yes, true friend to you.
What probably touched me the most was the night that he lost to Holmes. The night before he fought Holmes, I was in his room, and he ripped his shirt off and said, "See, you think I can't win? Look at me, look at me." And it was eerie because he looked exactly the way he looked when he fought Sonny the first time.
Right.
But I said to him, "You could have done that at the European Health Spa." Well, what I didn't know was he had done it with diuretics, and he had no strength at all.
Right.
and he had no reflexes either, and that was before the diuretics. Anyway, so he fights, and it's awful. He throws one punch, and when it ends, I just said, it's just, you never should have taken the damn fight. So, and of course I knew Holmes very well too, and we were friends, and I know Holmes really didn't want to punish her the way he did. Ali he had to end the fight, and Richard Steele, the referee, was a good referee, wouldn't stop the fight.
Right.
Anyway, well, who's going to stop the fight when Muhammad Ali's fighting?
Sure.
Not the referee.
Sure.
And not that corner, no matter what they say. I know how that fight stopped. Herbert Muhammad, the manager, was 5 rows back, and he sent word, this fight stops now.
Right.
And that's when Angelo said, I'm the chief secretary, we're going to stop the fight.
Right.
But it was Muhammad. It was Herbert that stopped it. Anyway, the point of the anecdote is I'm walking around Caesars and gambling. I lose a little bit, walk around, talk a little bit. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, now I can't sleep. I walk into the men's room, and an elderly Afro-American gentleman is handing out towels.
Right.
Now, I say elderly. If it happened today, he would be younger than me.
Absolutely.
But this is many years ago, so to me, he was elderly.
Right.
And I said, can I ask you a question? Did you bet on this fight?
Mm-hmm.
He says, yes, I did. I said, well, who did you bet on? He looked at me and he said, I bet on the man who gave me dignity. I thought about that. That's an unbelievable legacy.
Right.
And now, then you can take it further. He gave dignity to the anti-war people.
Right.
He gave enough dignity to the pro-war people by not screaming at them and whatever, that they were willing, and toward the end, to talk it over with the other people. This is a guy who really, he's not perfect. He's
Right.
not the devil, and he's not the angel sent, and he's not the devil incarnate.
Right.
He was Muhammad Ali, and that was enough for him to be, because it was perfect for America at that time. The thing about him, he didn't grow up the way I did or the way you did.
Right.
We matured. He evolved, in my opinion. In other words, his growth was all of his opinions and whatever. He wasn't afraid to change them. He wasn't afraid to modify them.
Right.
And he didn't do it for money. The guy only had one commercial in his entire life as a fighter.
Right.
And it was for a bug killer.
That's right, roach killer.
And if you think about him, we talk about humanity. He was as a person,
Right.
He's listening to the news Thursday or Friday before he fights Ernie Shavers.
Yes.
And I really did want him to take that fight. Nobody else who cared for him or cared about anybody getting hurt didn't want that fight to happen, because Shavers was the hardest one-punch fighter I have ever seen in my life, and he hit never below the neck. So that's where Ali took the real beating.
Right.
And he was out on his feet in the 15th round.
Yes.
And somehow found a way to win it. Because on my card, which is the one I use, it was at 7-7 in rounds. And he managed halfway through the round, he was really stunned. And then he came back and almost knocked out Shavers.
Right.
So, anyway, getting ready for that fight, he's watching television, and one of the news programs comes on, and they're telling the story about this Jewish old age home in the Bronx, where they've been able to raise money from donors for next year, but they can't pay the current bills, and they're going to evict them, and it's December, and it's snowing, and it's like the Christmas Carol almost.
Right.
And Ali says to Kilroy, find out, where this place is. Don't tell them I want to know.
Right.
Because if there have been cameras or pencils, or tape recorders, he probably would not have gone. It's something he wanted to do. These people were old. He got up there and he rang the bell. A rabbi answered the door, recognized him. He saw these people sitting around with walkers in front of him, and he said, I heard that you're going to get put in the snow, and he says, well, Muhammad, it's true. I can pick up from next year, but we can't make it by our deadline this year.
Right.
And they're going to shut us down. So he says to Kilroy, get the checkbook out, write him a check for whatever the amount is.
Right.
I can tell you I mean, I'm sort of breaking his confidence by telling this story.
Right.
But I can tell you that the check, I won't give you the number, but it was in excess of $100,000.
Right.
And then he left.
Right. Jerry, you are entering the International Boxing Hall of Fame this weekend. So truly, we appreciate the time you've given us, helping us better understand the full breadth of the man. You said yourself, not a saint. He had his various sides. But I'm so grateful that you're contributing to helping maybe a new generation of people understand how this fighter was a role model for living, not just as a fighter.
Well, they need to understand, and I'm grateful for you for letting me talk about my friend.
Jerry Eisenberg, the writing pride of New Jersey. Congratulations on the Hall of Fame entry. We thank you so much for joining us on TalkBox. Be well, sir.
Thank you.
You told him I don't have nothing but a prayer. Well, chump, all I need is a prayer, because if that prayer reached the right man, not only will George Foreman fall, but mountains will fall. And you're always talking about Muhammad. You're not the same man you were.
This is Michael Woods, Everlast-sponsored podcast, TalkBox, and we are graced with the presence of the preacher, the man who is a Hall of Famer as a fighter, and I dare say, I don't want to embarrass him, but as a human being as well. George Foreman, big George Foreman, won heavyweight titles, and to me, helps provide a blueprint on how to live with grace and charm and dignity. I'm sorry, George, I'm laying it on a bit thick, but you've been helping me out in this post-Ali era. The greatest passed away on Friday, and so we're all left a bit adrift, and we're trying to navigate new terrain here. I ask you, how are you doing? You are inextricably linked with the greatest. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How does the world feel without Muhammad Ali in it?
Boy, I can tell you this. I felt like the wind was knocked out of me. And I'm still kind of reeling a little bit, because all I've ever known as far as trying to compete was looking over my shoulder. There's Muhammad Ali, if not the champ, trying to get the title. And then away from the title, trying to, of course, admire the best friend I've ever had. So that's a great emptiness, I can tell you that.
The greatest friend that you ever had. I think a lot of people are coming to the Ali legend who didn't know or had to be reminded. If they're just watching YouTube footage of you and him rumbling in the jungle, they're saying to themselves, well, no, wait a second, Ali kicked this guy's butt. How come Big George ain't angry at him and holding it against him? Help us understand and comprehend why you have this abiding faith and love for this man.
Well, the fellow's always had this little magnet, so to speak. You see him and you love him. And I'm telling you, even I was in the ring with him. We had no arguments. We never had a press conference together prior to the fight in Africa.
Right.
He gets into the ring, looks me in the eye with this mischievous smile and said, George, you were in school when I was fighting Sonny Liston. You don't belong in the ring with me. I almost burst out laughing. I said, is he kidding? Then the fight was on. A joker to the last. Always wanted to have a lot of fun. Couldn't help but love him.
Right. So say when he busted chops on Frazier, on Joe Frazier, and called him a gorilla and Uncle Tom and such, it looks like, to me, Mr. Frazier took it to heart. When Ali was doing that stuff, you weren't taking it to heart. Was that sort of a put-on, a persona, Big George?
You know, I signed to fight Muhammad Ali, and we did it by way of a telephone conversation. I said, are you certain you want to fight me? Yeah, I want to fight. I said, you definitely want to fight, because I knew how dangerous I was. He said, yeah, George. I heard he needed the money, of course. And then he said, I'll promote it. I'll promote it. The next day, he's calling me the Frankenstein monster. That's the way he did things.
Right.
It was all in fun.
Right.
Frazier, that never bothered Joe Frazier. What happened was the confusion was Joe Frazier, when he was calling him an Uncle Tom, he thought he was calling him a peeping Tom. And he didn't want his wife to think he was peeping in people's window. It's simple as that.
George,
Joe
I
Frazier loves
I don't
Muhammad.
care if that's a true story or not. I'm just running with it, and I love it. That's utterly
That's a true
tremendous.
story. Joe Frazier told me this in confidence while we all traveled together in Europe. He told me, he said, man, I didn't want my wife thinking I was leaving in the morning with that hood. He ran with a little hoodie on anyway. He said, I didn't want my wife thinking I was peeping in people's window. He had no idea what an Uncle Tom was.
Utterly priceless anecdote from George Foreman. George, you are heading to Louisville for Memorial Service Friday. Is that correct?
No, I will not make the service. I'm
Okay.
not able to handle that. I can tell you that straight up.
Okay.
Not at all. I'll make a
You would not
visit
be able
down
to hold it together, George?
I beg your pardon?
You would not be able to hold it together emotionally. It would just be too much for you?
No. I don't want you to see me on CNN crawling on the ground screaming and all that, so
Right.
I'm just going to stay home.
Right. I understand.
I truly lost a friend. There's nothing to show, I can put on the show about now. I mean, I lost my friend.
Right. George, at different stages of our lives, news like this hits us in different ways. As we get older, I think it's fair to say that more of us contemplate the end of our time in this ring of life. Did you and Muhammad, because you have that background as a preacher, as a spiritual man, did you and Muhammad ever discuss the end and the higher power and the concept of heaven and that material?
Yeah, I can tell you this about Muhammad, and that's why I always thought whatever he'd go into the hospital, he'd always come back home, because never met a human being that loved living as much as Muhammad did. Talking about death, that was not his interest. He wanted to talk about life.
Right.
Didn't matter how sick he was or how frail he looked. He wanted to be out in the public. He wanted to wave and sign autographs to the last. That man loved life.
Right.
And anyone that loves like that deserves to keep living. I love life myself, and I want to keep living. I don't want to talk about death.
Right.
That's enough of that.
George,
I wanna
I
live.
love your ability to continue to laugh even when it might be appropriate to shed tears, but you also show that softer side of yourself, and I appreciate that. Big 6 foot, what have you, 280-pound man, heavyweight champion. You're able to do both. A quote from Mark Twain stood out for me. It said, "The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time." I got the sense that Ali was that. He didn't look back with regret on taking all the punishment as a fighter, on some of his missteps. There was the Nation of Islam dalliance that had him being a separatist and speaking that whites and blacks should be separate. None of that stuff he looked back on with regret. That was just part of the chapters of his life. I do get the sense that he was perhaps prepared for meeting a maker because he realized that he lived life to the best of his ability, and he did it right.
Yeah, Muhammad was such a wonderful guy, lived his life. And I can tell you, he must have been joking when he left out of his life, had a joke or something he wanted to tell someone. He'd love to call and surprise you on the telephone.
Right.
And if he could, he'd even show up at your front door, because he knew how important and how what a great person he was, and a personality and a presence he was. He'd come to you.
Right. George, it really made sense that you and Ali would do another fight. Can you tell a story? Did we ever almost reach fruition of another fight with you and Ali?
Muhammad called me once in Livermore, California, maybe less than a year after the boxing match.
Right.
And he said, George, I said, how do you do? He said, do you want the rematch? I said, yeah, I want that rematch. And we talked for a moment. Then he said, well, if you take Sadler back, I'd fire Dick Sadler. He said, if you take him back, you got the fight. I said, I'm never going to work with Dick Sadler again. That's your trouble. You don't want to work with anybody. If you don't take Sadler back, you're not going to get the fight. I said, I'll get the fight. And that's as close as we got to making a rematch. We never did.
George, why was he so married to wanting you to take Sadler back?
I have no idea. No idea at all. But that was the case, and that's why the rematch never happened.
George?
And I'm happy because I'm happy about that, because once in the ring with Muhammad was enough for me.
That was going to be my question. In a rematch, did the same thing happen, or did you get the blueprint on how to beat him, and would you have beaten Ali in the second fight?
That man was so smart. He wouldn't. The next time it wouldn't have been the rope-a-dope. I'd been prepared for that. It would have been something else.
Right.
He was smart. Not only was he a fighter, but he was clever. And not more than that, he loved boxing. He loved the ring.
Right. George Foreman, is there anything that we should be knowing, concentrating on as we move from this mourning stage to this celebration stage of the life of Muhammad Ali? What of his legacy do you believe that we should be focusing on?
All his children, they've got a lot to say. I'm in touch with Hannah always, the baby daughter.
Right.
She had the last words with him as he left his life. These people got so many stories to tell that beyond me, and I'm always sharing stories with them. They always have another to share with me. Like the time he was in New York City, Hannah, and he was sitting there. He said, "Wait, let's sit here and see how many people recognize me." She said after a while, the police had to come and escort him with a horse away.
There will not be another like him because he mixed athletic talent and outside the ring charisma and an ability to magnetize eyeballs. There simply will not be another like him. As long as this world keeps turning, George, they will know and speak of Muhammad Ali. You will be linked, yes, in a loss, but you will be linked through the ages with this man. And we do so much appreciate you taking the time to share some of this, some of these anecdotes and this energy with a man that they call the greatest. George Foreman, thank you so much for joining TalkBox.
Thank you. Anytime.
Be well, sir.
The minute I hit Sonny Liston, all those people blinked at that moment. That's why they didn't see the program. I swear. And if you watch the film close, you gotta hold your eyes.
Michael Woods here with the Everlast sponsored TalkBox. Muhammad Ali, he liked to wear those Everlast gloves, actually, so this is appropriate. And we are speaking to people who have been there and done that and were with the man and spent ample time with him. We don't want secondhand stories. We want people who were there. One of these people is Gene Kilroy, business manager, right-hand man, friend, confidant, the whole nine. Gene Kilroy, we thank you so much for taking the time joining us here on TalkBox.
Yeah, well, it's nice being here, Michael. We always had a great relationship with Everlast. Ben Norbeck, who owned the company,
right,
and he was very close with us. I remember when we built a training camp, he sent his crew up there. We put the ring there. I mean, he's always done so much things. He reached out to Ali. He was a good friend. And one time we're in New York City, and Ben had his Cadillac there, and Ali was in the car, and Ben autographed the dashboard, and he said it was one of his proudest positions. But I mean, after Ben left, and John Toms was another guy. He is Mr. Everlast. You know, he stayed very close with us, and then you know, Everlast's been so good to us. Mr. Clancy, he works with Everlast down. He's
right,
a good guy, and he stays close to us. So Everlast has been always a important part in our body.
Gene, appreciate the kind words about the company. The man is gone. We saw his vessel, his bodily vehicle, failing more in the last few decades. So I think we all understood, yes, that this day would come. But we spoke the days before, and you said, Mike, this is when Muhammad does his best fighting off the ropes. You thought maybe he had this one last rope-a-dope in him. Did you, Gene?
Well, you know, I wanted him to retire right after Zaire, Africa. There was nothing more to prove.
Right.
You know, John of Elijah Muhammad, Minister Farrakhan, we didn't want to see him go on. But as you know, fighters, they beat everything but Father Time and,
right,
and the heavy bag.
Right.
You know, they want to keep going on. All athletes, none of them, their mind tells them they can do things, but their body refuses it. And that's the way it was with Ali, you know. The bugged up fight, I said, you don't even need to take this. You know, he said, I'm getting $3 million
for a fight. I wouldn't even hire the guy as a sparring partner. And then the Thriller in Manila was I mean, that was the toughest fight. And that was the gladiators when they fought there.
Right.
It was just unbelievable.
If you were only able to be present for one of the fights, Gene Kilroy, which one would it be? Which one stands out most for you?
I'm going to surprise you on something. When you're very close to the guy, you laugh, you smile, you eat, you sneeze, you travel. But I thought the best fight for him was the second Frazier fight, where after the fight he just put on his suit, and we walked down 7th Avenue onto Madison Square Garden for the press conference, and everybody was yelling, "Ollie, Ollie," and he was just as handsome as ever, no bruises, no nothing, and it was a victorious fight.
Right.
But a lot of people didn't like it because they didn't just kill each other. But Ali fought a smart fight, moved, hit, you know.
Right.
And that to me, that was the best fight. But as far as boxing fans, the greatest fight of boxing fans was that Thriller in Manila.
Right. Gene.
And another thing, what
yes.
was remarkable, I mean, he won the title in 1964.
Right.
And 10 years later, regained the title.
Right.
You know, let's talk about something here.
Yes.
You see athletes cross the goal line. Thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, this, that. And Muhammad Ali, he believed in Allah as his God, like the Pope believes in Jesus, and he's entitled to that. And the Honorable Elijah would call him before every fight and tell him, you know, you can't lose this fight. Allah's on your side. So he had that confidence to go in to win. Now, you remember Sonny Liston was a bully.
Yes,
you know,
sir.
Ali beat him.
Right.
And then Leotis Martin came beat him. Foreman was a bully. Ali beat him. And then Jimmy Young can beat him. But I think the greatest thing to happen to Foreman and made him so wealthy is Ali made him a humble man after that defeat. You know, Foreman was a pretty tough character up until that.
Right. Gene, we, in recent decades, have come to see the humanitarian side, and some of the rhetoric has softened regarding race and such, but I don't know how much people do know the depth of the anger and hatred towards him when he was standing up against the Vietnam War. He was so anti-establishment. Can you help put into perspective the amount of people and the depth of the anger and hatred towards him that was present, and which speaks to his character, because he didn't care. He just simply stared in the face of it and said, "No, I'm standing up for what I believe in."
Well, a lot of people didn't like him because of his stand. You know, I got in an argument one time with Jackie Robinson and Joe Louis and all the, you know, but I said he was entitled to it. But when you look back over the war in Vietnam,
right,
the rich people in Vietnam, they went into Paris to live. Our guys went over and got killed.
Sure.
After the war, they came back. Now you got to remember about the draft. The rich man's son and the intelligent man there, the man who graduated from high school with great marks, he got a deferment.
Right.
You know, he didn't have to go. He went to college.
Right.
And Ali, you know, he didn't have that great a skills from scholastically.
Right.
And it wasn't about that, but he said it was an unjust and unholy war. But getting back to the draft,
yes,
they said he was a draft dodger. But how about the kids who couldn't afford college and they went over and got killed?
Right.
You know, and now the ones who got deferments, you know, no one's talking about them.
Right.
They didn't go. They didn't. And then the draft, right after that, when Ali bucked the draft, they said, okay, now we're going to pull a pill. And whoever you are, we're going to draft you into the service. So all of a sudden they're pulling the pill, and here you're having Gore, a lot of politicians, a lot of rich people going into the service. So then they said, okay, let's demolish the draft. So Ali was one of the guys who helped change that system, the draft, believe it or not.
Right.
If you sit back and look at it.
Gene, how difficult was it for you to see the physical effects of his condition upon him? And did you discuss with him how mentally it affected him? Was he truly, really at peace with it? Or
Well,
were there times where he said,
he
I
was
wish I
blessed
didn't
to have
fight?
great caretakers. His wife,
Right.
Lonnie, and her sister.
Right.
They took great care of him. All when you seen him, he was so sharp, neat and clean, always. You know, I went to see him one time for his 69th birthday, and I walked in, and he was shaking and he drooling, and all of a sudden he reached up and grabbed me and kissed me. I said, well, I hope he stays here as long as he wants to stay here. But when it's time to go, the God will, when he wants to go, the God will take him. So he stayed here, as long as he wanted, I guess. But now he's at peace. He doesn't have any of the never Willoughbys coming around, and everybody wants to be a big shot. I watch the television, and there are people that didn't even know him. I mean, they met him for a cup of coffee.
Right.
They're their best friends, and they're all on there talking about Ali, and they was Ali's friend, and guys are writing books. Another guy has a book. The day after he died, he has a book coming out.
Right.
I mean, those are the guys, the users, and the con men,
Right. Gene, do you remember the first time you laid eyes on him? Can you share that recollection?
Well, I met him in Rome, then we became friends, and then I went with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he went into boxing. And then the owner lost the team. He sold the team. I was working in New York with MGM, but and then he got an exile, and I hooked him up with a guy by the name of Richard Fulton, who did his college lecture, and he was one of the hottest guys on the lecture scene. Well, then right after that, I met with Governor John Bill Williams, the governor in Jackson, the governor from Mississippi.
Right.
They didn't have a boxing commission. The one governor controlled it, and he agreed to have a fight there. But then they changed it because he got so much pressure on him. And then Senator Johnson out of Atlanta, he said, look, we could do this. And then it started, and then Madison Square Garden said, look, all the money we lost, and they brought him back there. And then that started his fighting career. And he was training in Miami, spending a lot of money.
Right.
So I put him with Pete Warwick Mitchum, the accountant team, but we made a businessman out of him.
Okay.
And then he opened up his training camp. He wanted a training camp. So we opened one up in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania. That was his own creation. He wanted logs. We had a log cabin gym. He did all that. And everything we spent in there was a write-off for him. He didn't realize you could do that.
Right.
But that's the part I played for him.
Right. And I know the children, when I speak to them, speak so highly of you, and the fact that you've stood with them, stood by them, such a loyal friend all these years.
Well, Jim Brown said,
yes,
you were accepted, but you were a white man accepted by the Nation of Islam. You're
Right.
a pretty special guy. But I had meetings with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he told me that man judges man's action, God judges man's heart.
right,
And then he told me about the white man is the devil. He said, I don't call you a devil. I call the white man the devil that prosecuted the black man, hung the black man, lynched
Right.
the black man, raped the black man's children, deprived them of getting an education. You must be a devil. So I was accepted by all those people. I was accepted by Ali's family, even today, and all of the close people around, the real people around Ali. So that's a great honor. When a guy comes up to me like Karl Malone and gives me a hug and say, thank you for looking out for our guy. Charles Barkley, the same way.
right,
Frank Thomas. So many people come up and says that Roger Craig. That to me that's better than a guy coming up and giving me $10,000 cash.
right. Gene, I do believe that so many people simply do not understand. I've been reading some of these columns saying that Ali transcended race, and listen, I can't speak to it. I'm a Caucasian man who grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, but I think I know enough to know that this was a person, Ali gave license to kids from 8 to 80 to act as you wanted to act, to speak up, to be anti-establishment, to be proud of being black. And maybe that is the greatest element of his legacy, and the fact that you, a light-skinned man, was there for so much of it. It's pretty amazing and intense.
Well,
were there ever times, Gene? Were there ever times when you heard the Blue-Eyed Devil kind of stuff where you ever said to Ali, "Well, why are we hearing this stuff? Can't we all just get along? What is this divisive stuff?" Did you ever have these discussions?
Well,
with him?
Ali wasn't prejudiced, and
Okay.
Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he had white consultants and people working.
Right.
People believe what they want to believe, but I mean, Ali would hug little white kids, and we would go visit hospitals. There were black kids, white kids, Chinese kids there. It didn't make a difference,
Right.
It was about, he was colorblind.
Right.
That didn't affect Ali. He was a good man. And he told me one time, he said, when we were kids, the only one we had in the movies was Aunt Jemima, or the lady, the maid with Gone with the Wind.
Right.
And by him saying, I'm beautiful, we're black and beautiful, it's sort of, people started to get into movies and stuff,
Right.
He told me the story where they were brainwashed. He said if a white car and a black car was in a race, the white car would win. The bad guy wore the black hat. The white guy, the good hat. If you're in a fraternity, you're blackballed. The angel fruitcake was white. It was all, and he believed in that, but there's, they put the black people down so much. It was terrible,
Right.
Couldn't go in a restaurant. The way he told me the story in Louisville, he said when he went into a restaurant to eat and they told him, we don't serve color there. He said, I don't eat color. So they put him out, and he was so disgusted he went home, and he did get the gold medal and threw it in the river. Now people are saying that it didn't happen, But I know one thing, Muhammad Ali never lied.
Okay. Beautiful recollections from Gene Kilroy, right-hand man, through all those tremendous
I
fights.
just want to, say something.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure when Ali died and he went up to meet St. Peter at the Golden Gate, and as St. Peter stood there, St. Peter said to Ali, welcome to heaven, and can I help you with everything? And Ali said, well, I'd like to go through the Golden Gates. And St. Peter said, come on, we'll take a selfie, and I need your autograph, and you could go right in.
Tremendous. Gene Kilroy, Las Vegas resident, he was there for all the good stuff. They went to all these exotic locales on places that people didn't even know how to pronounce. Kilroy was there, and he was right by the side of the greatest of all time. Gene, last question. If we want to sum up the legacy for someone who really didn't know too much about Cassius Clay, also known as Muhammad Ali, also known as the greatest of all time, what should the legacy be seen as?
Well, he believed in freedom, justice, and equality for everybody, and that was from his teachings with Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He was a kind man, an understanding man. He always had time for the poor, the powerless, the oppressed, deprived. I remember we went to training camp one day, and Ed Schuyler, who was the head of Associated Press, was there and doing an interview, and some little kid came through the door who was writing for a local high school, was doing a paper on Ali for the local high school newspaper. And Ali spent just as much time with the little kid as he did, with Ali. He was such a remarkable man. There's so many stories we could be here all day.
Amen.
One time we were in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Yes, sir.
And a lady in the lobby asked me, she said, I understand you know Muhammad Ali. I have a sick son. He's very sick. Would Ali visit him? I said, come on up the room. So we went up, and this little old lady there from Malaysia, he said, yeah, I got to do my roller tomorrow, 4 o'clock, and then my exercise. I'll see you in the lobby. We'll go see your son. So the next day he runs, and he does the exercise with Louis Arita, the trainer. Ali and I, we had breakfast. We get out in the lobby. There's a little old lady. I said, what hospital is your son? She said, my son has leprosy. He's in a leprosy colony. I said, oh, my God, Ali said, well, let's go. Well, at that time, the leprosy people was so contagious, they would put out food for the ones who had it and back up.
Right.
So here, Ali and I, we go up to the leper colony, and Ali goes, she's in the back, and Ali went down. We sat there. I went with him. We sat there with the leopards, and he's talking, hugging them. You know, I was a nervous wreck. I came back and took about 5 showers. I say, Ali, wasn't you nervous? He said, no, God's going to look out for me.
Right.
You know, and this is a story that hasn't been told.
Right.
And this is the type of guy Ali was.
Right. Gene Kilroy, from your mouth to God's ears to Ali's ears. I hope St. Peter enjoys that selfie and gets that autograph. I know Muhammad spent hours upon hours. He wanted to take care of everyone. Going to give you the last word, pal. Message to your pal, the greatest up there in heaven. What do you want to tell him?
Well, champ, I know you're up there with your mom and dad, how much you love them, and Joe Louis, Marciano, all the fighters. I know you guys are sitting around having a great time talking about boxing and about life, and you know they're with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and all the Muslim followers, and who are proud of him from all over the world. And get ready for me. It won't be long. I'll be there, but I hope it's not too soon. But death isn't sad. We all have to die. What is sad is saying goodbye. So we said goodbye now, but let's hope we're all together someday.
Well said, Mr. Gene Kilroy. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it here at the Everlast-sponsored podcast, TalkBox.
Thank you, Michael, and good luck to you and yours.
Be well, sir. So, he is gone, and we must honor him. There will be a memorial service. Muhammad Ali's funeral will take place in his hometown of Louisville, Kentucky on Friday. That is June 10th at the arena there, the KFC Yum Center. It will be open to the public and will begin at 2 p.m. If you can't attend, it will be streamed live. You can go to alicenter.org for information on that. There is the funeral, and there is also a procession throughout Louisville on Friday, beginning at 9 a.m., a parade of sorts to advertise the immense effect that the man had on this planet. He is gone, I grudgingly say, but he is never to be forgotten. One of his best quotes was, he said, "Live every day as if it were your last, because someday you're going to be right." Sad to say, that has come to pass. Thank you for joining us on TalkBox as we honor the man, the myth, the legend, the greatest of all time, Cassius Marcellus Clay, a.k.a. Muhammad Ali. Thanks for the memories, champ.
Cassius Marcellus Clay. He's young, he's handsome. They know it. He's a poet, a prophet, and many people believe he'll be the next heavyweight champion of the world. I saw Sonny Liston a few days ago, Cassius.
Ain't he ugly? He's too ugly to be the world champ. The world champ should be pretty like me.
Well, he told me to bet my life that you wouldn't go 3 rounds.
Well, if you want to lose your money, then bet on Sunday.
Oh, may I ask you
Because
this?
I'll never lose a fight. It's impossible. Tell him. It's impossible.
Never lost a fight in your life.
Ask any of my fans when was the last time they lost. I'm too fast.
Champion from
I'm the
the
king.